So I think most of you know who Millarepa is. And for those who don't know, he's one of the most famous yogis in Tibetan history. And he's known to have achieved Buddhahood in one lifetime, despite doing a lot of non-virtue at the beginning of his life. And there are many stories that come from his life that are, I think, very good teachings for us as spiritual practitioners. And there's one in particular that I wanted to talk about. And I had come across in a book, I don't remember which one, a sort of interpretation of how he had to build stone towers over and over again and take them down, put them up. And they were saying that this is kind of an analogy for what we go through in our spiritual practice. And so I want to read more specifically about what exactly he did. And there's a book in the library, Tibet's Great Yogi Millarepa. It's supposedly a biography. And so it describes in detail how his teacher, Marpa, asked him to build, I guess, 5 houses in total, all out of stone. And it was supposed to be for Marpa's son. But Millarepa would get halfway through completing the house, and then he'd say, take it down. That was a bad idea. And then the second house, he would say, I was drunk when I told you that. Take it down. And then the third one is, I must have been out of my mind when I told you that. I don't remember that. Take it down. And then the fourth one, which was supposed to be 10 stories tall, he had started to get, I don't know, the 4th story, and he had used this giant boulder as a cornerstone at the foundation in one of the corners. And so Marpa came along and said, you can't use that stone. You know, somebody else gave you that stone. You have to go put it back. I guess I should have added that. When he took it down, he had to go and replace the stones in exactly the same place where he got them each time. And in the process of doing this, each time Marpa would say, as soon as you finish this house, I will give you the teachings. And he wouldn't give him anything in the meantime. And so Millarepa would finish halfway through, and then he would kind of sneak into an initiation, and Marpa would get furious and just throw him out and like beat him in front of all these other people. It was completely humiliating and degrading. And he actually tried to leave. He did leave, but Marpa's wife was very kind to him and would go out and comfort him and make sure he always came back. And in the process, Millarepa also, his whole back was one big sore. It was just a mass of like blood and pus. So what can we learn from this very extreme example of a dedicated practitioner? And sometimes I would say I've experienced something similar to that on a mental level, having come in and started to live here, given up some of my old attachments, and had to face the horrors of my mind, which can be quite horrifying. So the first lesson that I've taken away from this ordeal is that spiritual practice involves repetition to the point of insanity. I mean, no matter how many times you apply the antidote, you got to do it again, and you got to do it again, and you got to do it again, ad infinitum, until we can realize emptiness, which will get rid of the root of all of our afflictions. But, you know, this takes a long time. It takes lifetimes. So in the meantime, we got to get used to the rituals and the prayers, the same chants every single day, day after day. What are we doing here? And I think that's really the only way to overcome these negative habits that we've developed in our minds since beginningless time. And then the second lesson, which is maybe the most obvious one, is that your spiritual teacher doesn't always appear as your best friend. And they can appear somewhat crazy, petty, inscrutable, or even downright punitive. But of course, this is really not what's going on, and we have to check our minds, continue with our practice. And eventually we'll see that actually they always have our best interests at heart, and it's the self-centered attitude and the ignorant, lazy mind that doesn't understand why hard work and humility are eventually in our best interest. And And yeah, it's just a matter of keep practicing. So then the third lesson is that self-serving ambition always bites in the end. So if we're constantly grasping at some future outcome and striving to do these impressive deeds so that people will think we're fantastic and that we're an inherently capable and productive person, meanwhile not paying any attention to how we're treating the people around us or how we're conducting our actions of body, speech, and mind in the present moment, eventually we'll become frustrated, we'll become very disappointed, and we'll hurt a lot of people in the meantime. And so I think Millarepa would have loved to have just kicked back after finishing each of those houses and basked in his industriousness. But his teacher wouldn't let him do that, and he came along and said, you know, why are you gaining satisfaction from such mundane deeds? And then the third is that spiritual practice can often feel more like demolition than construction. And of course, there's also the construction piece. Right now we're building a Buddha hall. But I really like Venerable Tarpa's quote in her email signature line, which is, it's easy to build a monastery, it's much harder to build a beautiful mind. And it's by the Thai forest master Ajahn Adan. And in large part, I'd say my practice up until now has been tearing things down, noticing the wrong views when they arise, all of these distorted conceptions I have about myself and others and the world around me, and trying to figure out ways to dismantle it, but doing so in a way that is compassionate and that's gentle, and that is something I can digest. So I thought to take this analogy a little bit further, on a daily basis, my self-centeredness and my preferences are challenged, and I feel like the windows are kind of rattling. And then if I get publicly scolded or criticized, I feel like the walls are shaking. And when very strong afflictions come up and I can't run away, I can't distract myself, I have to face them, it feels like the roof might blow off. And then there are times when I get a glimpse of just how deep my delusions are and just how deep are my wrong views and habitual ways of perceiving the world. And that feels like the foundation is shaking. And I was in an earthquake in Virginia not too long ago. And it wasn't that scary. It was maybe a 4. And so it wasn't a big deal, but I can imagine that people who are in major earthquakes, it's quite terrifying. And that's actually some of that distress has come up when things like, you know, someone I love has died, or I really realize my mortality. I mean, not just for a moment and then it's gone. Or I see that I can't continue to rely on others to provide my sense of self-worth. And I can't take refuge in a bank account or a marriage or a passport that has a lot of stamps in it. And my body, my loved ones, my career, my possessions, these used to be the stone towers that I took refuge in. They used to be my security. They were going to protect me from sickness and discomfort and death. But when you ordain, and if you practice sincerely, you're called to tear down these refuges, these false refuges, more and more. And that can be really scary because it feels like there might not be something there to catch you when you fall. And one of the last places I worked, there was a magnet on the refrigerator. It said, "Leap and the net will appear." And they attributed this to a Zen saying, and I'm not so sure that's a Zen saying. But it has stuck with me. And sometimes it really has felt like, in order to deepen my refuge and my faith in the Three Jewels and in my teacher, it's like jumping off of a tower into a hole, and I can't really see where the bottom is. And then the last lesson I want to draw from Millarepa's experience is that spiritual progress is not always linear. There's no schedule that neatly outlines when we're going to attain realizations and the bodhisattva grounds and years or, eons even. And sometimes personal growth can feel like taking steps backwards, because we have to try different things, we have to make mistakes in order to find out what will work and what will ultimately serve us along our path. And I know Millarepa probably felt that he wasted so much time and energy each time he had to take down that tower, and he does. He says, you know, his heart is bursting, he wishes he could die, he hates himself. It's very dramatic how he describes his reactions each time. But he had to go through that process in order to develop the fortitude he needed to clear away his negative karma and obscurations. So as practitioners, I think it's very important if we are able to acknowledge our mistakes, because only can we then go in the right direction. And it's also important not to be afraid to make mistakes, because sometimes that's the only way we can grow. So may all of us develop the many good qualities that Millarepa developed throughout his training: fortitude, courage, humility, faith, and joyous effort, so that we may attain our own spiritual goals and help others attain them as well.